Welcome back to another installment of the 1942 Capehart 500M restoration. This is my personal set that we've been kind of servicing on the side in between customer projects. So we now have all three amplifiers completed. This is phase one before the chrome plating. This is just to get everything restored and running again. Here you can see we have the 1942 M series amplifiers. And one of these goes to the mid and one goes to the bass speakers, but they were practically identical when produced in 1942 for the 400M setup. So you can see we have a full set of tubes now installed. These are NOS tubes. We also clean the top of the chassis. There is some corrosion. We cleaned it to the best of our abilities. The original rubber power cords were in pretty poor shape, so I found replacements that are original time period rubber power cords have been cleaned and serviced. We did that for both here. Each of these sets originally use, or each of these amps originally use 5Y3Gs, 3 of them a piece, as you can see here. When we initially took apart the machine, there were 2 5V4s only in each amplifier. Likely due to the tube shortage of World War II, we restored everything back to factory specifications. 4 6V6s on each chassis, and then we have 2 audio input tubes here. The 6R7, which is the first audio in, that was used only in the 1942 amplifier year. These are designated A10 amplifiers. So these are the deluxe amplifiers that could be ordered for 1942. They also were used on the 400M and even on the deluxe Panamuse models. Now the difference here in the amplifier lineup is the utilization of the original 1937 chrome-plated 500 amplifier. Remember, the set that we've been working on here was originally bought as a 1937 500E, and it was upgraded in 1942 with the M series electronics. So this is an original chassis that was utilized when the set was brand new. So this is for our treble speaker. You can see we've replaced the tubes here. We have push-pull 6L6s, 1 5Z3, and then 2 input tubes. I think these are 6C5s. Now there's an added tube here that the dealer must have installed. What they had in place was a 12SQ7. Now this set only uses 6-volt filaments all across the board, so it's kind of odd finding that tube in there. If it was at peak performance, maybe it'd work, I guess, halfway, because you know it's 6 volts. Although it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Originally it should have been a 6SQ7. Now I've completely disengaged this tube from the circuit, because after checking with friends and those more knowledgeable than me, nobody really knows what they're trying to accomplish there. So we polished the chrome plating as best of our ability. It is severely pitted and scratched just due to the storage conditions over the years. We did utilize the original power cord. We cleaned up the plug and also the 2 pins here, the prongs that come out. Now you notice here on this amplifier, this has an added shielded cable with a 4-pin plug. This is actually for the 18-inch bass speaker, and this plug plugs into the treble speaker here. This was created by the dealer in 1942 when they did the modification to the Capehart 500 that I own. So we're going to be utilizing this once again, of course, and you'll notice here in these terminals what they did is kind of strange, because they put the field coil wires for the 18-inch speaker on this chassis and the field coil wires for the treble speaker on this chassis. Now I don't know why exactly they did that. This chassis here is supposed to use a field coil rating at 435 ohms. As you can see there, the DC speaker field, which the 18-inch speaker basically equals that. The treble speaker's about 100 ohms less. So we're still trying to figure that out. Let's take a look underneath and see what all we did on the underside of these chassis. Okay, here we have the underside of all three chassis. Our 1942 M Series A10 amplifiers here. As you can see, I've completed these recently. Everything checked out on the bar resistor there, the voltage divider resistor, and we have a whole new set of electrolytics and capacitors and resistors installed here in this chassis. We go over to the next amp, which powers the 18-inch Jensen speaker. There's a slight modification shown right here. We have an added capacitor, and here's our input wire, that shielded cable that I told you that connects to the treble 1937 amp. So that is an added modification that we've retained. You can see here all brand new resistors and capacitors, the finest quality caps I could find. We have utilized here in this chassis as well. Our electrolytic network here, I went ahead and devised a network there that I thought looked presentable and also functional. So you can see here we have those two completed. Now these two shiny boxes here are the inputs. I've used the RCA jack. There's a series of several resistors and micas in each. Those have been dismantled and new parts installed as well. Here is our treble chassis. This is the original 1937 chassis. It was chrome plated when the Capehart was bought brand new in 1937 originally. You can see we have our set of Solon replacements for electrolytics here. All three electrolytics have been disengaged here. We have our resistors, our capacitors, our network there. Now one thing that was added on this chassis during the modification was this 0.05 capacitor coming off the input to the first tube on the amplifier chassis. We retained that modification, but we disconnected this modification, which is that extra tube, that 12SQ7, which should be a 6SQ7. After careful study, it was determined that potentially this could have been a distortion control. And the reason I say that is you can see a hole drilled here and a hole drilled here where a potentiometer could have potentially once sit. Don't know how they would have produced results with that, but clearly there was something drilled here which would induce a potentiometer. You can see where one would have originally sat here. You can see all the etching. Yeah, the potentiometer sat there a long time ago, so this is some sort of control for this amplifier. We've completely disconnected everything. There are two things still connected up, a grounding wire and an input wire here. It won't do anything. But that tube is totally disconnected from the circuit. And if you look over here on our schematics, this is the base chassis, the 1942 chassis, and you can kind of see how this 0.02 with the input, you look here on the chassis and how I drew it out, it comes off the 6R7, which is the first tube on the 1942 amp, goes through the plug into the input circuit of the 1937 chrome-plated amp, which should be right here. So you can kind of see how they did that modification. The mid chassis right here, which is also the other 1942 amplifier, no modifications on this chassis. You can see everything completely stock. Now one thing here down here, these two capacitors that were off the AC line, most likely used to filter out any hum or noise, they were originally cut out by the dealer, but they were retained in the base amplifier. So we kept that exactly how it was. So we've checked all of our transformers, primaries, secondaries. That was all good. Now this is the 1937 chassis right here. And as you can see, they made quite a bit of modification with the addition of this 12SQ7. Kind of get a glance there of what exactly it looked like. This is the only items that were hooked up when I received the set in 2021. So there are several pins that were disconnected. They had fragments of wire off of them that were snipped. So here's the 0.05 coming off the input that was added. And they changed some resistor values, specifically this one right here, which we took everything back to stock. This is a factory error that's in every single Capehart schematic for 1937 on the treble amp, whether it be a 4 or 500. That's been corrected. And then we had one plastic dip capacitor, if you remember, which is what you'd see in the late 40s. Nathan Miller passed away September 10, 1947, so there's a chance that his niece had it worked on either after that, although I have some service records that indicate the set was worked on in 1944 and 1945. This modification could have taken place then. Who really knows? So that's kind of all three chassis in a nutshell. They're all complete, and they've all been checked over 4 times, so should be no issues on power up. Next up, we will move on to another electrical section of the Capehart 500. Stay tuned.